When it comes to iconic BMWs, there's plenty of choice. With so much heritage, it's often difficult to know where to start. But when it comes to being reasonably affordable and iconic, there's only one clear winner: the E46. So I suppose the question we're trying to answer today is the BMW E46 still a great car in 2022? Well, to answer that, we've got to go through multiple different questions. One, is it still comfortable? What is the maintenance like? And as this is actually my daily driver, what is it like to live with? So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to my BMW E46 325Ci M Sport. Now, we're going to answer a question that I know a lot of people probably have. What does the M Sport have over the standard trim? Well, first of all, you get a nice fancy looking body kit, which in my eyes really does make the car look quite modern still and really has that iconic E46 look. Secondly, you also get slightly stiffer springs, slightly stiffer dampers. You also get a slightly better anti-roll bar and reinforced bushings. But apart from that, really the only differences are cosmetic. So it's worth bearing that in mind when you're looking for one of these cars, that you're not really going to see any major performance benefits. It's mainly about handling and the way that the car looks. Even on these twisty British back roads, the handling is actually surprisingly responsive, if anything, quite analog. So it's really is an enjoyable experience to have driving one of these things still in this modern day and age. In fact, I think I would argue that you get a lot more feedback through the car than perhaps some modern vehicles might give you. So for that reason alone, I think they're mega cars. They really are. Impressively, these cars actually do 0 to 60, depending on where you get quoted from, between 6.8 and 7.2 seconds, which in, I suppose, modern sports car terms, isn't particularly fast, but it is still a quick car. Not only will it take you to 60 mile an hour in about 7 seconds, it also takes you all the way up to 150 mile an hour, well, give or take. 149 is the official word. But for a 20-year-old car that really, a lot of modern cars don't even do that, admittedly. BMW has obviously a limiter on a lot of their models, but the point remains that for a 2-decade-old car, this thing still really does shift. And to be fair, with the reliability of the M54 engine, you can push them pretty high, even on stock internals. Will we be doing that with this car? Probably not, because it is my daily driver. I've got the Porsche 944 to be able to do the fun stuff with. But 192 brake horsepower in this thing, 6-cylinder engine, is still an incredible amount of fun. What I adore about the E46 is the way that the steering has a predictability to it. You can trust that even on some tighter corners, it attacks them with full confidence, which makes this thing on twisty roads an absolute joy. Also, now admittedly it could just be this particular example, which is fair enough, but the dampers are a little bit too sharp on the bumps. My 944 has Koni adjustable suspension and it seems to take up speed bumps much better than this does. So I wonder if there's something wrong there. And maybe it just means that my suspension needs a refresh, which is understandable. It's a 2-decade-old car. It may never have been done in its life before. So maybe it needs new dampers, maybe it needs new springs. But this is something you definitely have to consider when buying one of these things, is that, yes, it may be a 20-year-old car. Yes, it may well be a fantastic example. But you still have things you might need to replace because of its age. So before we get on to the exterior of the E46, let's talk a little bit about the trim inside. For a 20-year-old car, this particular example is in incredibly good condition. The seats have never been retrimmed, a lot of the dash isn't scratched, of course you get the odd scratching down by the ashtray, but that is fairly normal for a car of its age. The wheel isn't too perished, which is pretty impressive. And to be honest, the driving position is actually quite enjoyable. One thing that might annoy you, now that I've pointed it out, is the steering wheel is actually slightly off center to the left. So you're kind of here, but your arms are slightly to the left, which is okay when you get accustomed to it, and you probably didn't even notice when you get in the car. But now that you know, you'll notice it, and it will probably wind you up. But it's okay, because it doesn't really detriment from the driving experience. Gear lever, 5-speed manual, very, very nice box. It is incredibly nice to shift into, very, very precise and very intuitive. Back in 2002, of course, this would have been peak of technology, and to be fair, it hasn't aged too badly either. The seats are incredibly comfortable, they have a nice bolster to them, and to be honest, the bolster on this one hasn't even collapsed yet, so if you can find yourself with well looked after interior, it should last you a long time as well. All in all, I just don't think that this cabin has dated too much. Yes, modern technology with the flat screens obviously is missing, but I don't feel like I'm in a 20-year-old vehicle. I feel like, okay, 2010 perhaps, 10 years old, but not 2 decades. So fair play to BMW for really designing this thing ahead of its time. So now we've had a little bit of a drive out, let's talk about the exterior of the car. The E46 is one of the most timeless designs BMW has ever done, and to be honest, you can see why. The M Sport bumper, side skirts and trim definitely help really secure that iconic look, as well as the nice blue and the fog lights on this particular model. I also like the spoke alloys with the M badge on them, as well as the trim panel inside the interior of the car. BMW really nailed it with the look of this, and to be honest, for a 20-year-old car, it still looks modern today. It really is a testament to the BMW's design team of the early 2000s and late 90s. So now let's talk a little bit about the M54 engine that comes in these straight six cars. This one produces around 192 brake horsepower and a quoted 250 Newton meters of torque. And it's also incredibly easy to get more out of this engine stock with no internals needed, which is quite impressive for, again, an engine that is over 20 years old. Areas to look out for are the expansion tank at the front of the engine, as mentioned, because they crack and then you have no coolant to actually cool your nice engine, so that's not particularly good. There's also a couple of other preventative maintenance things you can do to this. The air boot often likes to crack, causing to fluctuating throttle bodies, which isn't ideal, but other than that, they are an incredibly solid engine and very, very reliable. So what are the things you need to watch out for when you're looking to buy one of these cars? Well, first things first is the typical E46 rust. Every single car, unless it is properly maintained, and I'm talking from factory, will have rust coming through on the front arches. Now, if they're not there, either there's filler, or the arch has probably been replaced in its lifetime, or fair play to the owner, it has been very well looked after. But the majority of these cars do have rust on the front wings, particularly because they're old. Another thing you really have to consider is the expansion tank for the cooling system. This is something that I actually had a problem with on my old BMW E46 318. Basically, it cracks, and what happens is then you lose coolant, the engine overheats, and that is never a good thing in these cars. So definitely keep an eye out for the expansion tank. It's basically a maintenance thing that you need to look out for. If it hasn't been replaced and the previous owner does not know if it's been replaced or not, I would highly advise you doing so. Alternatively, you're more than welcome to look at the condition of the expansion tank and see for yourself if you think it needs replacing. Another area to consider on these cars is the rear springs and shock mounts. They're not overly amazing and have a bit of a reputation that they don't like to work very well. So it is something to consider going forward. There are on the market offers for reinforced shock mounts. So if that's something that you are concerned with, I'd highly suggest you looking into that. So let's talk a little bit about pricing. I picked this up for £2,500. And when I picked it up, it had done 97,000 miles. Now, of course, depending on the model of E46 you want to get, whether that be 318, 320, 325, 328, or 330, or even an M3, the price is going to range quite dramatically because the upper end of that range, specifically in manual, is increasingly becoming desirable due to the fact they're such good platforms for, of course, track cars and drift cars. What's rather special about this car is that you don't need to be going quickly to enjoy yourself. Whether you're pottering around town or out in the Peak District cresting the roads as they carve their way through the ancient landscape, it never fails to put a smile on your face. So for a reasonably priced E46 325, I would say you should be paying around $2,500 to $4,000 depending on condition and mileage. And I think, honestly, they are worth every single penny of that. If you are thinking of buying an E46 and have been a little bit on the fence, I would get one now, because in a few years' time, they're going to be increasingly hard to come across. So in conclusion, is the E46 still a great car 2 decades later from release? The answer is yes. It's decently quick, it has moderately good power, the handling is fairly responsive for a 20-year-old BMW. No, they're not going to be the fastest thing on the road, and most hot hatches can beat them off the traffic lights no problem. It's not about top speed, it's not about how quickly you get there. It's about having a car that can do it all anywhere. I've even got mod cons in here, air conditioning that is very, very effective. I have cruise control. I have electric seats, electric mirrors, heated windshield. It really is a genuinely good all-rounder. And for me, that's why I can't think of anything else I'd want to replace this with.